cool with whatever we do. Jioni safu no la with whatever we do. Leyi demunyu school. Nyepamne ne kudlukula. Nyepangi ragala gena. Nyepamne ne kudlukula. Ibuloke nongoto ni beti sola. Ibuloke dato ni betoto.
Mingi! Mingi Congo.
Lamin.
Na?
Lamin te jibe norin te nyamen Lamin.
Kabana wulokono.
Wulokono nyinta mo Lamin.
Pabilenki.
Muna ngata afongo.
Haina.
Ngata. Ngoto le. Fabrama.
Mingi. Baba nyola.
Ngoto Fabrama.
Namu jumala kan kuma diten.
Fabrama.
Jumala mu.
Ndele yare muso.
Nunda mana. Jamani mbere.
Alindo ko.
Jamani.
Bari ngoto mon kontande.
Bari jamani bana na mudu wa kontan.
Ngoto minaka ngal filita. Lamin jibe norin nyala.
Lamin ila siran sama ne benki. Yala so tol sayndi no bo mo lakko momo.
Ngoto. Itedinte yalo ne Lamin hakilo diata bake karambu ngoto. Anu sante ministry ko di ngole si suko na amanke ko do holi de
sibitun
Bagona nga.
ala ni ala na mo balo
ala ni na ko na karta bulo be damna ala ni je
ngoto ngoto mon ko fere
jamani mun
ite ka Lamin ki wulo ko no nyinta mon ko do fete malo Lamin nyanta sila la be la moy kala karango
jamani karamol be soron ne ko fasita wulo ko nako
Baba.
karambu wol ma soron ni ko karambu wol soron da amanke ko holi de lem ngoto dini ngo nyanta sila la ala karango la moy yamen kamen fue man kontaan andamande
alla nyin kombo courant adanda la kombo ndo la jankara mol soron da goro kamen courant ma rado la kombo e to ndol fana na kara mol soron je kara mol soron Lamin dara lo nyino la man dara fe na so kon ala munekela
am Lamin ite fayde malon ko lesinol be ke kar radio to
Nga fine.
e ko nyina mo Lamin
Nga fine.
ya muna fonye
bi kabin mina kan ntambita nteri maning Fatu
ha
ntambite la sugal ala dinngol bebe siri be la moy ka
faru dan so am fana tambira je subala da ngaje dinni ngol be je talanta nen kili warol e be seri
sa Lamin farante ku kili wo ke no la ba Lamin bita ka wulo ko no nyin taymo Lamin
aman benela
ite ko ni man si yakari lesino la moy radio to e balon nan
muneka ke afende banya inde alon
telentel ko
afende ba munebe ke
ite balon tel be cikritel ni man karambe ku kele yaaje nata karana mbasa malaya ay tarije
par ñarande kombo courant ho findira kombo ide na raje den sonka bay ko Lamin manya ko kara mo be so da fanya membe
ko to wole nati bawo ngalle ni Lamin kuntala kombo courant o ka fa me kombo courant asototal wala kinay ko e sisu kono bari ni ko e sisu kono ibe karangol dike la radio lin telel to hani tele masoto to nyaay man tele soto la bongo bar radio be bulan koto batiri sanga ay si ala
do kala
do bulaji
abe o kala nyaade
kamun ke nyaade
radio abe wala moy la ibe mona falaje
ibe la karandirol kala jele
ti jalle be radio ko men ka karandirol
ile subject ro baby jele i baby jele
wala nan ka coco moy fa dan so wolya ngombe tambi kana ngadi ngol de be ikadum bungo de ko
asototal de
Lamin mala be kara wala de
Bari laftalal ideal on ko inde every year second wala fourth.
Muna ni ko di ko nde ko folle sini lamba nde le sini no ne ba
mbasa mba foke en koto wole fango yen wulindi yalo famo keta bat ñu fanam bulata ko ko me yen nati jambi Lamin nyanta karana ndel be jiko be nyineka ya bulay kara wulo kono ta kilar ya bambalo yo be bulaje en koto dindi ngoy si ayala le sino la moy radio
wala ka munda kara mo man soro Lamin nyanta kara si
ayala silale ayala le sino
dal ko korno ko smolon
kilar ya
mo be ngala ko momo sa mi do ni ko kara
Mengi bruzo
ndelo ko do la rosa no bari woro radio ni abe jele bari ngamra do man dembe buljan dala nyara nyar woro ko fendi mo la Lamin tayra bari rosa
bara te ku folo ajibe nori nya labi tamete
mengi mun na de
teku
bari ko do famo ke
ja imade nani nyambol si zol le keje kisigi man si zol no le kafun ka nyoma bari nyambu kino ni manya na ka fendi ni nambe ko zol la ga
ngale limbeta de be nyambo do dilanna
nyara ni ko ridin fennat nyara nata
bari famo kada
ngata bungono tambi bungono nyara ngando ko fele ko ke baru nganda ni pelo la ndija
iyo awa betar la
bungono bismillah bisu diara
pendulala yefungo tanka sina dolu tanka koro korota korota
Good day, everybody. We're here again with some science, and today our topic is simple machines. My name is Mr. Quraish. Before we go on with our topic of the day, let us go to the homework we were given on food. These are the questions again. It says, why do our bodies need food? And the simple answer to that is to provide energy. Vitamins, why do we need vitamins? To maintain health. Proteins for growth and repair of the body. Number 2 says, list 3 essential vitamins to a healthy diet. You have a lot of vitamins, but I simply put vitamin A, B, C. There is vitamin D, vitamin K, vitamin E. Number 3, what is the other name for carbohydrates? It could be glucose, it could be starch, you have the saccharides, all of these are different names for carbohydrate. Number 4, give examples of food rich in proteins and carbohydrates. So for the carbohydrates, we have coarse rice, you have millet, corn, bread, and all these things. For proteins, mostly animal products like meat, egg, chicken, and some plant products like beans. 5, what is meant by the term balanced diet? This is simply a diet that contains all the different nutrients in the correct amount that help to keep us healthy. Number 6, what is meant by food spoilage? That simply means when the food has gone bad, when it has decayed due to the actions of our organisms. Food poisoning is the sickness we will get because our organisms have produced some toxins, some poisons in the food, and when you eat them, you become ill. Food contamination simply means our organisms, microorganisms that cause disease and illness, when they come in contact with the food, that is food contamination. Food preservation is all the actions or the methods that we use to treat food so that they can stay longer. What microorganisms cause food poisoning? Mostly bacteria and fungi. Name and describe the local methods of preserving food. Drying, smoking, salting, pickling, and a lot more. Number 9, what disease is caused by lack of protein in our diet? Lack of protein is, the disease is known as kwashiorkor. And what are the symptoms? One is protruded belly of a child, and usually the limbs, especially the lower feet, they're swollen, and the head is like with less hair, and the muscles are all emaciated or gone. So we come to our lesson of the day, which is simple machines, and we have some examples there. Levers, inclined plane, wedge, pulley, wheel and axle, the screw. A machine is simply a device that makes our work easy. It is a device in which energy input at one point produces work output on a load at the other point. Less force is used when we use machines to do work. So don't forget, simply a machine is any device that helps to make our work easy. And how does it do this? We simply apply energy or effort at one end, and then that effort overcomes or is doing work at the other end of the machine. So we use machines to achieve the following results. 1, transferring a force from one place to another. And number 2, changing the direction of a force. 3, increasing the magnitude, that is the size of a force. And lastly, but not the least, increasing the distance or the speed of a force. So these are some of the reasons why we want to use a machine. There are 2 types of machines. We have the simple machines, and then we have the complex machines. Now, simple machines are made of few parts, usually 1 or 2 parts coming together to work as a machine. And the complex machine, complex simply made up of many parts. They are made of several parts that are all synchronized to work together. And as we showed earlier on, there are 6 types of simple machines that we, at this level, are going to look at. Levers, rollers, pulleys, wheel and axle, the inclined plane, the wedge. And we'll go further to describe each of these machines and how they make work easy for us. So again, we have a photo of the different machines we have there. The lever, you'll see usually we describe it as made up of a fulcrum, a turning point, and then load is applied on one end and you apply the effort at the other end. We have a pulley, which I think we commonly use when we are fetching water from wells. And the wheel and axle you have in the machines like bicycles and cars, where you have the wheel and you have an axle connected to it. The screw, you can see we use screws a lot in connecting parts of maybe machines or wood. The wedge, like the ones people who try to split wood, they use a wedge to make it easier for them to split wood by placing the wedge in between the wood. And the inclined plane is simply a raised platform. For the wheel and axle, if you look at the bottom left of the picture, there's a wheel, and the axle is simply the rod that is connecting the two wheels so that the load can be moved. The wheel and axle are made simply by mounting a wheel on an axle. If you take a look at the image shown on the right there, the bigger one represents the wheel, and then the longer one, thinner but longer one, represents the axle. The wheel could be attached to the axle that was supported by a bearing, or it could be made to turn freely about the axle. The wheel greatly reduces the friction encountered when an object is moved over a surface. This has led to the development of carts, wagons, and chariots, and of course today a lot of wheel and axle are applied to things that have to move, like the wheels of cars or the wheels of bicycles and so on. And for levers, like we can see in the image there, it's simply you have a support at one end, maybe in the middle, and there you have, like we see the kids there, one kid on one end and the other kid on the other end. So the lever simply consists of a long beam, a long stick or something like that, and the fulcrum. The fulcrum is the point of attachment where the lever rotates. So the mechanical advantage, we'll talk more about that later. The mechanical advantage of the lever depends on the ratio of the lengths of the beam on either side of the fulcrum. So how does the lever work? If you take a look at the image on the top right corner, now you can see from the fulcrum or the pivot, you have a long arm, but then this enables us to use a small force or the effort, and then we can overcome the load, which is actually a large force. Examples of levers, we have the scissors, the nut cracker. That's not so common here. I mean, we normally crack our nuts using stone and rock. But nail clipper, you clip your nail frequently, you should know that one. The tongs that are used for picking up tiny objects. If you go to the watchmaker, you see them using this device to pick up tiny materials. The wheelbarrow, I don't need to say much about that. And the seesaw, like the example we saw a moment ago. So for levers, we do a lot of study on that at this level, because we classify levers into three. There is a first class, there is a second class, and there is a third class. Now, what help us to identify which class is which is simply you're looking at the position of the fulcrum or the pivot relative to the other parts of the lever, that is the effort and the load. Now, if the pivot is between the load and the effort, that is a first class. Now, if the load is between the pivot and the effort, that is a second class. And finally, if the effort is between the pivot and the load, that is a third class. Let's look at some examples that we use in daily life. The scissors. The fulcrum is between the force that is applied, that is the effort, and the load. The load is what you need to cut with the scissors. So because the fulcrum is between the load and the effort, that's a first class. Nutcracker, the load is between the fulcrum and the applied force. So you can see you have to place the nutcracker in the middle and then the fulcrum is at one end and the applied force or the effort is at the other end. So that is a second class. If we go to the pair of tongues, in this case, the effort is applied in the middle. So the effort is now placed between the load. The load is what you need to pick up with the tongue. So the effort is in between the load and the fulcrum. So that is a third class. Now if we come immediately below the tongue, the fishing rod is also a third class because the effort, that is where you hold to pull the load, is in the middle. The fulcrum is actually closer to your arm, and the load is the fish or whatever that you're going to hook up. The wheelbarrow, like the nutcracker, is a second class because the load is between the fulcrum. The fulcrum is simply the wheel that is the turning point. That's the one that is rolling. And the effort is, of course, is the handles that you hold to push the wheelbarrow. And the scissor, like the seesaw, they sound the same, scissor. They are both first class because the fulcrum or the load, the fulcrum or the pivot is between the two forces, that is the effort and the load. The inclined plane is a simple flat surface that is raised at one angle. Like we can see, it's like a ramp, The angle, that is the steepness of the inclined plane, determines how much effort is needed to raise the weight. If you make the plane, if you make the angle very steep, you're going to need more effort. But if you make it less steep, then you are going to use less effort. We see this every day at construction sites and people trying to take something from a lower area to another area, and if the load is too heavy, they simply take a plank, like a board, lay it so that they have an angle, and then like you can see in the image, it's very easy to raise that load. However, you will notice that the guy has to move a long distance to raise the load, just a very short distance. The distance the load is actually moving is simply from the ground level, let's say if that is a truck, up to the truck, but you can see how far the guy is actually moving. The pulley is simply a wheel and an axle, a wheel with an axle, and then the wheel actually has a groove, something like a hole where the rope is fixed. The pulleys are used to reduce the time and the energy we use in lifting heavy objects. The good thing about pulleys is that they let us to pull downwards, which is towards gravity. It's easy when you're pulling towards gravity than when you're pulling against gravity. And you might have seen this when people are fetching water from wells, and also at construction sites you see a lot of pulleys being used to lift concrete or sand and cement from ground floor, and they take it up, especially when they are constructing story buildings. The screw is essentially a long inclined plane that is wrapped around a shaft. A shaft is like the rod, and there you have an inclined plane that is going round and round. Therefore, the mechanical advantage can be seen or looked at in the same way as we describe the inclined plane. So the screw is simply an inclined plane in another format because it's simply the inclined plane that is winding round and round and round. Now, what is the advantage here? It makes the work easier because if you use a screw in joining boards, for example, of wood, it makes it very easier, or it makes the joint to be very strong compared to when you put a wood, because with the screw, it is actually going through a very long distance compared to the nail. Wedges are moving inclined planes that are driven under loads to lift or into a load to split or separate. Like I described earlier, when somebody is trying to split a wood and they place a wedge there, when they hammer, using gravity, they are hitting on the head of the wedge. But what is the wedge doing? The wedge is directing that force outward, splitting the wood. So a longer, thinner wedge gives more mechanical advantage than a shorter, wider wedge. So if you use a wedge that is very thin, you'll be able to do more work. But then if you use a shorter one that is wider, then you have to put in more effort. So here is a picture of a simple wedge. So this, I think, is made of a metal. So if you have this and you want to split wood, or you want to, like those doing woodwork, you want to shape or you want to remove some wood, it makes your work easier. Generally with machines, the energy input we describe as simply the work that is done by the effort. So the energy input, like we said, you're putting in energy. So when you apply effort, that's the energy input. We say it is simply equal to the product of the effort and the distance the effort has moved. Similarly, the energy output is the work that is done on the load. And in the same principle, you can say it is the distance the load is moving multiplied by the weight of the load itself. So we have a mechanical advantage to look at. Why do we use machine? You want to gain something, you want an advantage. So we calculate this as the ratio of the output force to the input force of a machine. What do you get and what do you put in? You compare the two. So it's simply a comparison of the two. You're comparing the amount of force, that is the load lifted, compared to the amount of force that is used to move that load. So MA is calculated simply as the load over the effort. So MA equals load over effort. You need to remember this formula because usually they'll give you some questions asking you to calculate the MA of a machine. Example, a boy lifted a 50-kilogram bag of rice with an effort of 500 newtons. Determine the MA. Now, you're given 1 kilogram being equal to 10 newtons. So you try to extract your data, that is the information from the question. The effort is 500 newtons. The load is 50 kilogram. We have to convert that to newtons. So that will be 50 times 10. And that gives us 500. Now we use the formula MA equals load over effort. So it's simply 500 newtons divided by 500 because the load is 500, the effort is 500. So the MA in this instance is simply 1. Note that we don't use any unit because it's a comparison, it's a ratio of two things. This I'll leave for you to do as homework. Calculate the MA in using a lever to lift a 500 Newton load when an effort of 100 Newtons is applied. Again, I've given you the formula, MA equals load over effort. Velocity ratio, this is comparing the distance that the effort moves to that of the distance the load is going to move. And the formula is simply effort distance divided by the load distance. So to lift a load by 0.5 meters, the effort applied has to move through a distance of 2 meters. What is the velocity ratio of this machine? The formula is given there. Effort distance over load distance is the velocity ratio. So I'll leave this one also for you to try. And in our subsequent lesson, we will check the answer. And here is another one. Determine the MA and the velocity ratio in lifting sand weighing 300 newtons with an effort of 100 newtons. The sand is raised 100 millimeters off the ground, away from the ground, whilst the effort is raised 300 millimeters. So you have to find the MA and you have to find the velocity ratio. Formula for both of them are given them. Again, like I said, I'll leave that for you to try, and the next lesson we'll look at it. Let's come to efficiency of a machine. In a machine, the work output is always less than the work input, since part of the input is used to overcome friction and to move parts of the machine. So a machine, we are told, is never 100% efficient. And why is this? Because some work is done in trying to overcome things like friction, heat is produced, and so this is why what you gain from a machine is always less than the work that you actually put into the machine. We say efficiency is the ratio of the work output to the energy input, and the formula is energy output over energy input multiplied by 100%. So the efficiency equals MA over VR, MA being the mechanical advantage, VR being the velocity ratio, all multiplied by 100%. A machine has MA of 2.5. If the VR is 4, determine the efficiency of the machine. So again, this will leave with you to try, and next lesson we'll check the answer, but that's the formula. Efficiency equals MA over VR multiplied by 100%. Next, we want to look at moments. Simply, we describe them as the turning force. What do we mean? We say it's the turning effect of a force. You know, you apply force, and that force is causing movement. It causes a machine to move. We say it's the product of the force multiplied by the perpendicular distance from the line of action of the force to the pivot or point where the object will turn. So simply, moment of a force equals the force multiplied by the distance. Moment equals force times distance. Moments act about a point in a clockwise or anti-clockwise direction. Take a good look at this image, and you'll see you have a fulcrum like we've made before. That is the point at which a lever turns. And we're describing, or we're trying to say that the moment acts at the point either in the clockwise direction. That means they're moving in the direction the hands of the clock are moving. Anti-clockwise mean counterclock, or they're going against the direction the hands of the clocks are moving. Let's look at this image. That's somebody trying to use his hand to move that knot, and on the right, the person is trying to use a device so as to turn the knot. If you have experienced this, you might have noticed that on the left, you'll be using a lot of force. In fact, sometimes it's impossible for you to even move it. But when you use a machine, it becomes easier. What's causing this? Because with a small, here you have a very small moment, that is the force multiplied by the distance. It's very small. Compared to the one on the right, you have a large moment because the force has been multiplied. The distance rather has been multiplied. You're using the same force, but now the same force multiplied by a larger distance. Compared to the one on the left, you're using the same force, but the distance is much smaller. So when you're doing this, it's simply, we say it relies on the amount of force that is required. For doing it with the hand, you have a lot of force. But when you use the spanner, because the spanner increases the distance between the fulcrum and the line of action of the force, thus the same force, for the same force, a greater moment is obtained. Remember, moment is a force multiplied by the distance. So we have the principle of moments. It's very important for us to remember. It states when in equilibrium, the total sum of the anti-clockwise moment is equal to the total sum of the clockwise moment. What do we mean? Take a look at the drawing. You can see the fulcrum, and we have effort on the left, effort of 200 newtons, and we have the load on the right, 600 newtons. But look at the distance of the effort from the fulcrum. It's 6 meters. And look at the distance of the load from the fulcrum, that's 2. So what the principle of moment is saying, if you multiply the effort by the distance it is from the fulcrum, the figure you have, if this system is in equilibrium, if it is balanced, should be equal to the product of load and the distance. So 6 times 200, 1200 or 1200. Equally, on the right, for the load, 600 times 2 to give us 600. So when a system is stable or balanced, it is said to be in equilibrium, as all the forces acting on the system cancel each other out. So more examples, you have 2 people on a seesaw. Now the one on the left is 500 Newton. He's sitting 2 meters from the fulcrum. The one on the right is 1000 Newton. He's sitting 1 meter. So if you multiply the 2 by 500, that gives you 1000. If you multiply the 1 by 1000, that also gives you 1000. So that tells us that both the 2 are in equilibrium. So this further describes how that is calculated, because we say for person A, the moment is simply the force times the distance from the force, and that gives us 1,000. For B, it is the force of 500 times the distance of 2. So we can see that person A's moment equals person B's moment. So in simple terms, anticlockwise moment equal the clockwise moment. So therefore, the seesaw is said to be in equilibrium. Here is an example of a question. It says, a force of 15 newtons is applied to a door handle, 12 centimeters from the pivot. Calculate the force, calculate the moment of the force. Now, we're given 12 centimeters, but remember the unit for moment is in meters, not centimeters, it's Newton meter. So with the centimeters, it says first we convert the centimeters into meters. So 12 centimeters equal 12 divided by 100, that gives us 0.12, because 100 centimeters equal 1 meter. So then you can calculate using the values given in the question, which is simply 15 times 0.12, and that will give us the answer, as you can see on the right there. Moment equals force times distance, the writing in red. And the moment is simply the 15 newtons, that is the force that is applied, and the distance is 0.12 meters. So that gives us a total of 1.8 Newton meter. Another question, a force of 40 newton is applied to a spanner to turn a knot. The perpendicular distance is 30 centimeters. Calculate the moment of force. So again, we have to convert this 30 centimeters into meter. That will give us 0.30. So moment is simply force times distance. That is 40 times 0.3, and that gives us 12 Newton meter. Another question here. A parent and a child are at opposite ends of a playground seesaw. The parent weighs 750, that's a large force, and the child weighs 250 newtons. The child sits 2.4 meters from the pivot. Calculate the distance the parent must sit from the pivot for the seesaw to be balanced. These are the type of questions you might likely be encountering, because this was taken from one of the past papers. So we look at the child's moment equals force times distance. So 250 newton times 2.4, that equals 600 newtons. So parent's moment must equal child's moment. So if we rearrange M equal F times D to find the distance for the parent, D equals M over F. So then calculating using those values, we have 600 Newton meter divided by 750 Newton meter. So the distance the parent must sit should be 0.8. And if you check that of the distance the child sits, that is 2.4 meter, because her force or her weight is low, 250. But that of the parent, which is 750 newtons, she only needs to sit less than 1 meter away from the pivot to balance it up. All right, so we have a series of questions that I'll just flash, and you need to try them. And later we will work on the answers for those ones. So here, question 1. The mechanical advantage of a machine is the ratio of D. We have options: A, load over effort; B, effort over load; C, effort distance divided by load distance; and D, load distance divided by effort distance. So the question again, the mechanical advantage of a machine is the ratio of what? Load over effort, that's A. Effort over load, that's B. Effort distance over load distance, that's C. Load distance over effort distance, that's D. Question 2. An effort of 20 newtons is applied to a machine whose mechanical advantage is 4. What is the load lifted? We have options: A, 80; B, 24; C, 16; D, 5. I have like 5 to 10 questions here. So what I want you to do is, if as fast as you can, you take down the information, and next lesson the answers will be supplied. Number 3 says, one way of reducing frictional force in a machine is by cooling the engine with water, allowing the engine to rest, lubricating the engine with oil, allowing the machine to work manually. Question 4, a force of 5 newtons is used used to move a machine through a distance of 4 meters. What is the work done? Is it 20 Newton meter, 9 Newton meter, 1.25 Newton meter, 1 Newton meter? Question 5. A 4 Newton load is moved by a machine when an effort of 2 newtons is applied. What is the mechanical advantage? We have 16, 8, 6, 2. 6. A load of 60 newtons is lifted by a machine whose mechanical advantage is 3. What is the effort applied? We have 10, 20, 60, 180. So when you do the calculations, you will be able to see which is the right answer. 7. The wheelbarrow is an example of first class, second class, third class, fourth class. You have to choose one. The efficiency of a machine is always less than 100%. What is the reason for this? A says it's high mechanical advantage. B, the greater load to effort ratio. C, the work done when operating it. And D, the work done against friction. A body of mass 2.5 kg is raised 4 meters above the ground. Determine the work done. We are given G equals 10 meters per second square. So when you do your calculation, check and see, do you get 1 or 10 or 25 or 100? 10. A body of weight 200 newtons is located on a truck by a machine whose mechanical advantage is 10. What is the effort required? 20, 200, 2,000, 20,000. You have to choose one. 11. A machine does 720 joules of work in 6 seconds. Determine the power generated. Is it 140, 120, or 4,000? A machine lifts a 50 Newton weight from the floor onto a shelf 1.5 meters high. Calculate the work done. We have the options there: 33.3, 75, 112.5, 150. An apprentice takes a bag of rice 50 newtons onto a vehicle through a distance of 10 meters in 5 seconds. Determine the power used by the apprentice. Is it 10 or 100 or 1,000 or 10,000? So that will be all for today, and for particularly my very patient listeners.